Hey, and welcome to podcast Invest in You. Today you got Fredrik Sandvall, and on the guest side we got Brad Olsen. He sits very much in the intersection between markets, media, and investors. And the reason I'm really happy to have him on is for complete random reasons. We have recently had one of his colleagues, so I can build on that conversation. So if you scroll back and find something about Benzinga, it will be some good conversations there as well. So as chief content officer, you are helping to make the whole business more visible, creating many millions of views from potential investors and so on and so forth. With a background across finance, media, and news, I can't wait to dive in. And right now, who doesn't want to be a content creator? Well, let's figure out. So, welcome to Invest in You. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thanks, Fredrik, for having me on.
Absolute pleasure. So right now you got the consumers of media and you got the creators and then you got the people who are somewhere in the middle who's a little bit dabbling with both. Why is media so on topic right now?
So one thing that I would call out is the barriers to entry, right? I
Please, yeah,
think for
yeah,
for for a long time there were very large impediments to producing video and
yeah.
to producing content that was visible on the web. I think with the advent of social media platforms, obviously smartphones, obviously everyone is can be a media company in their pocket.
Indeed.
I think what we're going to see and maybe starting to see the early stages of is especially with the advent of AI, is how do these established brands regain the trust that potentially was lost, but also is potentially being frittered away by some of the new media world. I guess you have some of these
Yep.
influencers. They're one scandal away from losing their audience, and
Yeah.
the checks and balances that typically come with a media company are often overlooked by the end consumer. And so one thing that we're trying to do at Benzinga is just ensure that our audience can trust what we are writing. We disclose when we
Yep.
use AI tools. We have the typical double checks of unnamed sources and typical multiple humans reviewing a lot of the content. So,
Yes.
it's obviously technology has dropped the barriers to entry, and now everyone wants to be in media for various reasons. But our goal is just to continue to hold the trust of our audience and specifically those who are interested in becoming better investors.
Yeah, exactly. And also with media right now, you got different variations. You got on one side, you got the organic one, and then you got the paid one, and then you got like the hybrid, which is like maybe accelerating organic. So some key observations. You've been in this industry for a few years. How have you seen the shift to what we see today, which is, in my point of view, more and more paid is becoming more visible, whereas it's harder to get traction as organic, even if some of the rules have changed.
Yeah, that's it's definitely a good observation. Despite some of the regulatory bodies' best efforts to improve disclosure
Yes.
and otherwise, it's still rather easy for individuals to blur the line between paid content and organic content. For us, at least, we are in a lot of different areas where we have to be upfront with
Yep.
very obvious disclosures that a post was potentially sponsored. You could do that on both disclosure landing pages and also within the copy itself. I think it's obviously the same model that we've seen across new venture capital businesses where it's users first, monetization second. And so everyone, especially the individual influencers just will, you know, whether they say something inflammatory or something with heavy engagement, get that user following first. But then eventually you're going to have that difficult question of, well, how
Yep.
do you continue to do what you want to do? You have to continue, you have to get paid.
Yes.
Our model doesn't rely exclusively on paid posts. It's one component of what we do. We have our
Indeed.
traditional advertising mechanisms as a media business, but obviously we have some sponsor relationships with various companies. We disclose those upfront, but our bigger pieces of the puzzle are tend to be our licensing data businesses and our subscriptions. So, we don't exclusively run towards that paid model, but
Yeah.
I understand it's very, very easy for individual influencers to do that. There are all these different platforms that allow them to easily monetize their audience, and can't blame them for doing that.
Yeah. So I just do a little side bracket here, which you might be able to add to. I was recently attending an event hosted by X in Middle East, and it was super informative how they are so keen to get like original content to their platform, just not for views, but actually to train AI. So they were very much like in the business of paying serial content creators or really help them to boost to become very visible, because the X as a platform and Grok underlying AI is very much trained on all the data, and also Grok can also interact with the social media X if you have not tried that out there. So I know that you have a channel there, so just use that one as an unusual way how AI and the platform are so integrated, where they really try to suck in content. Feel free to elaborate if you agree, of course.
Yeah, I mean it's we've had conversations with a lot of different AI companies
Yeah.
about their training of models. We have different licensing partners
Yes.
also that have wanted to train on our data. We just try to treat that a little differently than the
Indeed.
traditional licensing relationship.
Yeah.
We try to draw some lines in the sand about to what extent they could then use and then pivot that information towards something that might be either competitive to us or otherwise. But I don't want to say just because the price is right, we let it
Yeah.
go forward, but we want to make sure that whatever models are training on the information that we sell to these AI outlets, we want to make sure that they're just not turning around and disintermediating the very people that they're looking to train upon.
Yes. Yeah.
That's just obviously the paranoia, in the back of everyone's mind.
Yes.
You see AI overviews on Google, and you can't help but think, well, they've basically just taken everything that was written and rewrote it.
Yeah.
And the fair use principle is a tricky one, and we're still watching to see how far it goes before things start to break
Yeah.
rather dramatically.
Yes.
You're seeing some smaller publishers struggle more so than the established ones,
Yes.
partially for maybe the trust deficit is one where AI will gravitate towards established brands. I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that, but where the visibility is definitely lacking for these smaller players. And then
Yep.
you have to think about, well, if they're trying to train on the totality of the information, only training on a small subset of information sources will perpetuate those either biases or otherwise that already exist.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting challenge. I think for the publishing industry, it's going to be one where how far does it start to push back on fair use? And we've already seen that with book publishers suing
Yes.
some of these companies, and to some extent actually winning. But how far does it go? Well, we're still watching.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. No, I got a few books out there, and I can relatively easily ask AI to summarize my own book, even if it's just like trained on them in the open space, even if they are not available kind of outside Amazon. For whatever reason, they can of course still index anything they want. So I am an avid consumer normally of financial services information. So I was very much into trading more than 20 years ago. Actually, for like 30 to 20 years ago, I was doing a lot of like day trading, and then I was investing a lot in terms of having the best information faster. So feel free to elaborate on what financial media sees before the market actually reacts and the value that you bring to your customers ultimately.
Yeah, the real value that we bring is context, right?
Yeah.
So there are always headline news developments that occur, and on the face of it, you'll want to react. But if you don't know the entire backstory or the completeness of that development,
Yep.
then you might be on the wrong side of that investment. There's a term that we like to use calling known as sell the news, right?
Yes.
Where there's a development that on its face looks like it's possibly a positive or negative one for a particular asset,
Yep.
but because the market had already anticipated a lot of that going forward, there's the reverse that tends to happen with that information. And so that's one area where we like to bring a lot of the context to different breaking news developments for our clients. That's just one piece of the puzzle. We have a ton of data, as
Yep.
my colleague probably was on on your show a little recently, talking about the extent of our data platform that we provide, allowing investors not only the ability to self-direct and to do that analysis themselves, whether it's looking at options chain data,
Yep.
implied volatility. We have a whole host of earnings, uh, forecast data, KPI data, uh, scanner information, conference call transcripts. It kind of runs the gamut. All of that type of information is we both contextualize for the users ourselves
Yep.
by summarizing and producing content on top of it, but it's also available at the fingertips for individual investors themselves. So we basically do as much as we can, but as a self-directed day trader, we pride ourselves on speed and
Yep.
of that information, and we are nipping at the heels of all of the biggest players in the newswire space. And for the uninitiated who don't really know about our brand, you may see our website, and that's our mass market content that we provide. Longer form articles, they tend to gravitate towards the big names that everyone knows, right? Like Elon Musk
Yep.
or Elizabeth Warren or Donald Trump or whoever it may
Yes.
be, because those people are moving markets. But under the surface, with our Benzinga Pro product, it's every single headline, right? Every single individual development related to any individual company and sector-wide developments as well, whether it be in semiconductors or memory, which tend to be very popular right now. So,
Yes.
you may think it's only the web content, but we have thousands and thousands of pieces of content behind our subscription paywall.
Yeah, yeah. So you are sitting, you see the markets, you also see the headlines, you somewhat see the traders, and this attention is colliding in real time. What vantage point do you see that investors normally don't see? So, like, what's happening just above the visible stuff?
It's a
I'm
really
not
good
asking for
question.
insider trading stuff. I'm just
No, 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 no,
no,
of
no,
course not.
that's not what I'm talking about.
Well, so I get to part of my job is trying to consume as much information as I possibly can. So
Yep,
I'm watching competitors produce information. I'm watching our breaking news desk produce headlines. I have alerts
yep,
on all sorts of different equities and different pockets of the market. And so uh, I have the luxury, I guess, of sitting and consuming
yes,
as much information as possible without having to make actions, right? I don't trade during the day. I mean, I think that would
yes,
be a huge conflict of interest.
yep,
But I get to consume all of it. And when the market behaves a certain way, I feel like I have that pulse because I can just consume without that trigger happy
yes,
need to make a transaction. And obviously there's you know within investing lore, it's the more you trade, you tend to lose more.
yes. Yeah, the more high
The
frequency. Yeah, exactly.
right, but that's reserved for just a small subset of the market, of the
Yeah,
quants and HFTs of the world.
yes,
But typically, you want to trade less, and by not feeling that pressure to make a decision that you don't want to make, you'll probably extend the longevity of that of that career that you've chosen in trading. And
yes,
being able to consume more and understanding, the more you understand a particular asset class or a subset of equities or stocks or whatever you like to follow,
yep.
the better positioned you're going to be to trade. Like I said, you'll be able to sell the news when others are reacting without all of the host of information behind it.
Yeah. I mean, we've had more than a couple of fund managers on this platform. So we had one relatively recently. We spoke about gold, and in his own fund, they have basically moved from like 1.5 billion to 6 billion in a very short time frame, for being like almost like self-managed own fund with some external money. Really interesting conversation for sure. So yeah, there is some gold as if you go back in our backlog of episodes here. There's more to find. So let's make what you said tangible and usable for the early startup company. So what I like, if you to remember what you said when you started, like the consumption of your own, to have alerts, to consume the competitors. Why would that make sense if you are now a relatively early entrepreneur, just to stay on top of what is my competition doing? How can social media help you to see changes earlier?
Yeah, that's also an interesting question. I think one thing that is often overlooked when building a business is, and everyone looks at it like just look at your competition and
Yeah.
check in. But I think really diving into the competition
Agree.
in some industries are a little bit easier than others, right? And I think in the US, there's a tremendous advantage for entrepreneurs to lean on public company information
Yep.
that's forcibly disclosed, right? So
Yes.
diving into SEC filings, 10Qs, 8Ks, the 10Ks even, to just really understand what are the strategic weaknesses that exist within this business, where are the competitive threats that may be, assuming those competitors actually
Yep.
disclose that
Yep.
in a forthcoming way. But being able to keep tabs on that really aggressively, following your competition, speaking on podcasts like we're talking right now,
Exactly. Yep.
or whether that's on YouTube or X or other social media platforms. I won't get into who I was watching just
Yep.
last night, but I was, at night I was watching one of our competitors speak for about 45 minutes
Yes.
on an interview, and they decided that they wanted to share some information they didn't have to share.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
that was extremely enlightening for us to watch and listen to.
Yes.
So that would be my recommendation, is just understand who the people are in your industry. Are they producing earned media like these interviews? Are they writing their own blog posts?
Yep.
Or are they sent? Do they have their own newsletter? Do they visit different events and participate in those events on panels? Uh, Be surprised, people will answer as many questions as people often ask, which I think is surprising,
Yeah.
if I'm
Exactly.
being
Yeah. I
honest.
know what you mean. Yeah.
Um, you want to be helpful. Everyone wants to talk, but I think, and this is going to be the pot calling the kettle black, but I think a lot of people like to hear themselves speak. And with that, I will end my comment.
Yeah. No. That's a very good remark. I got multiple hats, and one of the hats is very diplomatic at the moment. So certain things I can talk about, other things I can't talk about, and again at length or very short. It depends. My favorite comment from my MBA, like it depends. Like,
Right, right.
sorry, politician answer.
Yep.
All right. So as right now, as we're recording, there are some really global events happening, and news stories break. They might be correct, they might not be so correct. Why is it so important to be right really fast when you have the responsibility like you do? You report in finance, you'd like to be as accurate as you can at the time.
We mean we have an obligation to our consumers, right? I mean,
Yes.
I think that's the first and foremost thing, is we want to obsess over our customers, and if they get information after everybody else gets that information, then they've lost, right? And I
Yes.
think it's less about, we often talk in the financial media space about this stock pick or this stock pick, and there are obviously some famous personalities within financial media in the US
Yes.
that are typically either on the right or the wrong side of any particular trade. But without naming names, and so what I like to think about is it's less about providing that hot tip that says, that's the stock that's going to jump 100%.
Yeah.
That's where people love to hear those. They love to hear those ideas. But what I'm most concerned about is preserving people's wealth. And if they have that information
Yeah.
quickly, they can make decisions to protect themselves, like whether that's any of these numerous oil related headlines that are emanating from
Yes.
the conflict in the Middle East. If you see those quickly, that's an opportunity for you to either, you know, buy some protection
Yep.
or, get out of a particular position that is
Yes.
exposed so that you preserve your portfolio. It's less about getting rich quick and more about how can you sustain yourself longer term, and having that immediate information allows you to preserve that wealth. And I think you mentioned you had a bunch of fund managers on your program recently. I think they would probably agree, especially given the math, that if you lose 10%, you have to make a lot more than 10% to get
Yeah,
that
exactly.
back.
Yes.
And so the way that you want to think about it is, how do you preserve the invested capital that you have as opposed to trying to get rich quick?
Yeah, exactly. And I forgot to mention something a moment ago. We also have a lot of people who are in acquisitions, and exactly what we said about watch your competitors. That's the same thing, like watch your potential target companies. It's exactly the same story. If you got a platform, who will you acquire? Just pay attention to what they're saying in public, because people are very often very overt. I mean, the best advice often is build behind the scene, but with social media, the temptation is, and I'm also doing this myself because I need to be visible to attract inbound interest for what I'm doing in my platform company. That if you build in public, that can have massive disadvantage as well, because it means people can copy you, people can get ahead of you, especially if you celebrate your wins so early, so it's not even a win yet, then you are in big trouble.
Right.
Just pointing out the very obvious here.
No, it's true, because you want to the social media companies, and we have a very public cases here around
Yes.
the addiction and people's tendencies to want to participate in that. And we're all humans,
Yep.
and having adulation or people celebrating you or giving you that positive feedback can be
Yep.
tempting. You want to get those likes, you want to get those reshares, and there's a temptation for everyone to want to be an influencer with hundreds of thousands of views or visits. And realistically, what I like to try to bring our team back to is, there's always going to have been someone who has 100 million followers or 50 million
Yeah, yeah,
followers.
exactly. Yeah.
Someone invariably will be that person. I don't want to take any credit away from the people who've achieved like mass followings, because I'm sure there was a degree of strategy and effort that went into it. But not everyone's going to have 100 million followers, right? It's not a typical standard,
Yep.
binomial distribution. So there's always going to be some of these winners, and trying to just because someone has 5 million followers or 8 million doesn't mean that that's what you should necessarily persevere and try to reach. It's you know but there's that temptation, and you probably have shareholders and
Yep.
investors in your company that want to see that, and they will point over there to that vanity metric and say, hey, XYZ's got 30 million, you should be trying to get there. But that may not be the core competency, and you might be
Yes.
better off not going forward with that. But it's just the law of large numbers. You're going to have you're just going to have invariably some people who are going to rise to the top, and it doesn't necessarily have to be you, and you can succeed without it.
Yeah. So again, for those of you looking for fast information for the market and for your trading or for your decisions in overall, I find it more helpful many times to follow the people behind the company instead of the actual company, because that's more the unfiltered early stuff that they maybe sometimes are not even allowed according to SEC, because again they want to have the attention. I'm talking not only talk about myself, I'm talking about everyone out there.
Right.
So follow the company and also follow the leaders. Reflection on the latter. Follow the leaders as
Yeah.
well.
Yep. I would say just underscore that. And it's really interesting. There were changes to Reg FD more than 10, 15 years ago that
Yeah.
that even allowed the social media posts to be considered
Yes.
d- information. So even if you're just building a business, you want to follow these leaders, but at the same time, even if you're an investor, you also want to be following these leaders
Yeah,
because at any
exactly.
given moment they could be disclosing information that's material to their business.
Yeah. So again, we have seen this being in the space, both of us, psychology and this more mass hypnosis. Why does psychology have such a huge impact in terms of trading? And of course, the media is right in the middle of that.
Yeah, I mean, I love that question. When I in school, I double majored in psychology and economics, and
Great.
I've always noticed the psychology element in trading. The typical literature that you want to read is that especially you want to be non-emotional when you're investing in trading. I think it's one of
Yep.
the hardest experiments to put yourself through. I even day traded well before I joined the workforce, the
Yep.
professional workforce, and it was it was an education in your own psyche. And I think being able to understand the basic psychological principles and having understood the history of psychology and how humans operate, you can better understand yourself and
Yep.
understand the biases you'll gravitate towards, whether it's these small positive reinforcement mechanisms that social media provides to individuals, or even the investing where losing money hurts a lot more than
Yep.
making a little bit of money, and being able to divorce those two and just being scientific about what does the math support? What are my gains? What are my losses? And by the way, this is not financial investment
Exactly.
advice. I'm not trying to tell people
Yep.
how to trade their money or invest their money, but understanding yourself is a big piece of the puzzle, and you'll find that story, littered along the highway of
Yes.
failed investment campaigns.
Yeah, and pretty much all platforms now have got some kind of like regulatory way how that you as consumer need to fill in the at least bare minimum knowledge test before you're allowed to trade. But I think one thing which is relatively new is these accounts which are not really trading in real assets. It's almost like gambling short term. So actually, you're not trading in the real market. You're trading in a platform which is mimicking the market, whether that's you're buying or selling or shorting, whatever your position. Can you try to explain this for especially the younger audience, what I am referring to? Again, we're not blaming the industry. I'm just trying to educate the difference between the old school, you buy and sell shares, you might short a real physical share, versus what is way more popular now, which is not even linked to the market at all. Please explain better than I just did.
Yeah, I mean, prediction markets is one area,
Yep.
although, you theoretically they say that for every transaction there's someone else on the other side.
Yes.
But I think, and I'm not a market structure wizard, but my
Yep.
understanding is that there are definitely some market makers who are now getting involved in this market to provide that backstop so that there is some transaction, but that even those transactions are quickly handed off to other participants. And so there's I don't necessarily know if there's a danger necessarily there. I do worry about the transparency of information in some of these platforms, right?
Yep.
Like, and this is public as well.
Yes.
The concept somehow that someone can take an event that many people have access to and create a market around it. It may be enticing for some people. The example that I've always used is, for some of your other audience who may or may not like Taylor Swift or Travis Kelce,
Yep.
there might have been a prediction market about when they're getting
Yes.
engaged.
Exactly.
And you have to imagine that there's a photographer who is involved in that engagement, or a location that's going to be welcoming them, and they did a cake test or whoever
Yep.
else. And think about the many numerous people who may have been involved in seeing
Yes.
that and suspecting that. And the counterpoint is, well, these are supposed to take into account all of the available information available to the market. And some of these people who may have seen this will be transacting in that market and helping to drive the price in a certain direction.
Yep.
However, that's not really how traditional financial markets were envisioned. There's, yes, mosaic theory that exists within traditional equities where analysts will go out there and they'll do what we call channel checks. In many cases, they'll stand at the front of a Best Buy,
Yep.
at any particular location, and they'll watch people enter the store and leave the store, and they'll say, "Wow, there's a lot of sales going on here," and they'll extrapolate their own views on where that needs to go.
Yes.
That's kind of a different story than people who are, at the right place at the right time, and maybe naively deciding to wager more money than they're ready to spend on a single event, as opposed to traditional investing, which is supposed to be about a better allocation of capital. Putting money in productive assets that have some sort of use case, and those companies can then take that capital and reinvest it into other productive uses to help drive the capitalistic, machine
Yep.
forward. So, that would be my caution is, I do see value in the prediction markets. One example that I frequently talk about with my team is take like an oil, like taking oil traders
Yep.
into account, weather forecasts, singular events in one pocket of an area. It allows more hedging opportunities, right? So if a fund were investing in a particular asset, and they'd want to hedge on a micro basis about
Yep.
something hyper local to their market, prediction markets will hopefully allow that to be better executed rather than the complexity that may be involved in traditional, derivatives markets, and coming up with, very, very structured transactions with uh, other counterparties that may have much, much larger risk than they're willing to entertain. So there is value in prediction markets. I just think
Yes.
what's probably going to be shaken out here in the next several months is what type of events can actually a market can actually be created around.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're also sitting in the middle of the media flow between the actual events. You might have various sources, and then you're filtering it out to your customers, which leads into the name of the game, which is right now AI, the mandatory AI question. How can you help yourself with enabling AI to maximize the output for your customers? So again, think AI from a content gathering and dissemination point of view, because that's very much your business.
Yeah, we were one of the earlier adopters of AI for our platform in both, creation and research,
Yep.
translation as well, where obviously we don't just operate in the US, we operate globally across many different geographic locations, as I'm sure my colleague mentioned on your show a little while ago.
Yep.
So we've definitely utilized it for both our licensing business and also for our content creation. What we're trying to do with it as much as we can is, rather than lean on it for, the whole soup to nuts content production, it's more about the research. So how many different data points do we have on a proprietary basis that we can use to help the research part of a lot of our reporters' processes?
Okay.
When we're talking about a particular stock that is moving, it's helpful for us to immediately go and gather as much information at our fingertips, whether it's through different filings or management commentary and our own database of information, being able to bring those together for our reporters in a productive way so that they can help craft the best possible story once they've had all of that research done on their behalf. So that's how we're really approaching it. I know that there are some less savory characters in this industry that are just using it for spam content,
Yep.
mass production of information. That's not where we're leaning. We're leaning more on it as a productivity hack for sure, but not as any sort of meaningful uplift in automated content. In fact, just in the last, several months, we've actually deprecated the use
Yes.
of a type of content that we used to produce that was pre-AI, which was very formulaic in its production and was designed to kind of give a lot of our customers' updates about particular stocks. But given the fact that it was, I deemed it to be of not a high enough quality, we've actually moved away from some of that and more towards higher quality human written content because we're seeing more reward, from search, and
Yep.
also it's just we know that everyone's, all of our end users' spidey senses, so to speak, are attuned now to look out for AI slop, and so it's our
Yes.
responsibility to make that more clear that we are the humans behind the content.
Love it. Perfect. So as right now there is zero barrier to entry to produce content online. I've been working with helping people with financial literacy for 25 years. I've been teaching that to many people. Um, what is the problem right now? Because ultimately you can remix, you can resell, you can retell. So financial literally get stuck on my tongue. Thank you. On YouTube. So who to trust, who not to trust. You don't need to name or shame. That's not the purpose of my comment. Why should people be a bit careful with who to trust online? Maybe, if you agree at all.
I do agree. It's on one hand, I we actually have a lot of contributors that produce content for Benzinga, some
Yeah.
big names who've developed followings and trust, and we like to give them a platform
Yes.
to better for greater dissemination of that information. And that's
Yeah.
something that we're going to continue to do, is to be a home for influencers and other individuals who have great ideas and great content production skills. What I would caution, and there was a recent research report, I think probably within the last 10 days, that did unfortunately go out and shame some influencers for the thing that you and I were talking about
Yeah.
earlier around paid promotion.
Yes.
And in many cases, it's very hard in YouTube and otherwise to properly disclose that information in a way that people want for it to be consumed, right? If you're
Indeed.
the average person looking for financial literacy information and you find someone who's got 2 million followers and there's a pop-up that warns you that there's a component of this that's paid, human nature, people just want to dismiss that and continue on.
Yeah.
And in many cases, you're doing the dirty work for some of the paid actors behind the scene by not taking those risks seriously. And so, what I would always advocate for people to do is look to where the incentives are. If someone is
Good
is is
point.
producing content and they're getting paid to talk about a particular investment, then you want to be wary of that. If that's how they're making their money, don't just automatically assume that because someone's on YouTube, they're making money off of, automated advertising. That is a drop in the bucket in terms of how much money you can actually earn on
Yep.
YouTube. The real money is in sponsored posts, and that's how people are really making a good amount of money. So just, it's buyer beware, I guess, is the short way of saying of saying this. But also, I will just, in a self-interested way, say find established brands who have checks and balances and will it's not in their best interest to mislead people. It's in their
Yeah,
best
exactly.
interest to remain a viable business. And one thing that maybe the audience is not really aware of is that, even when it comes down to something as simple as copyright licenses and otherwise, these small influencers are rarely getting sued, right, for
Yeah.
abuse of content, reusing someone else's content, reusing copyrighted material. They aren't the targets. The targets are the bigger established brands, and so
Yeah.
those brands have to be extremely careful about what they say, what they use, how they use types of things, because we have our legal system that keeps everybody in check. And a lot of the people at the periphery of content creation can often get away with doing things that are unsavory. And so I would just my comment to many is, the economic structure is such that it holds bigger businesses to account.
Yep.
So if you are listening to advice from any individual, just make sure that their incentives are aligned with your own.
Yeah, and often you can see the incentives from far, and you can try to analyze why. I'm just going to use a little part of my content strategy and show like why do I do what I do. So for a long time, I have been sharing like not how people should invest, but learnings from my own investor journey. Like here is what I did. It might not work for you, but here are some thoughts, and also having professionals like yourself to share their journey again. So that is very much amplifying and giving me a learning opportunity, and also helping other people to learn. So another example, like I wrote a book about trust, so Amazon bestseller on trust. It's very good to align yourself with a keyword, for example, trust. And then earlier this year, I published a book about there is things at the horizon. There is a potential correction that is maybe due. So book is called Abyss of Finance. So again, just to a little bit make people aware, not afraid, but aware. And here are the signs, and here it works behind. And then the next book is like, if you are a business owner, here are your options. Like you can do your stuff alone. You can do it better, most likely with advisor, or you can do it in partnership. And then the next will be how people can build trust in their business and the steps for that. So why would I do that? In a way, to get the right kind of companies and people to grow. So hopefully in due time, we might do some kind of partnership together. So that is kind of like one content strategy. And it's similar for some of the big names out there, that they are providing so much value. So eventually people might want to partner with them in business. And that's far more interesting than any of the course selling, etc., etc. So feel free to share one of your underlying thinking without sharing company secrets, of course. One of your content strategies, what you're doing, and why. So again, you don't need to talk about anything secret, obviously, but just a thought so people can learn from that.
Yeah, in terms of content strategy, we one of the principles that I kind of think about is there's something that you think might work, and then there's what actually works, right?
Yeah.
And being aware of the data that tells you what is happening goes a long way. And so the short answer is data, I guess, on the content strategy
Fine.
side. And I forget exactly the individual who kind of led me to this thought pattern, but in many cases on the product side, you can be building something and you could say, we're going to build a scanner, let's say for to use Benzinga Pro, we're going to build a scanner to help everyone find out what stock is doing. It has a lot of volume today,
Yep.
and surface that information. And we may assume when we're building that product that people want to learn about volume, but it turns out that within that scanner, people are actually clicking around and using that same functionality to surface, VWAP, right? And the volume
Yes.
weighted average price, right?
Yes.
And that tended to be the most useful purpose of that tool. And that helps us say, oh, wait a minute, like our audience actually didn't care about this basic thing. They cared about this other thing.
Yes. Good
So
point.
let's focus some of our efforts on surfacing that, making it clearer to our audience that this is something that we provide. That might help dictate something on our evergreen side where we produce content around
Yep.
the VWAP or otherwise to attract a newer audience. And so I think one thing that I would just want to caution everyone is, there may be unintended uses for the things that you are creating in whatever business, and let the data and your customers lead you to some extent to the promised land. And I want to be clear, there's a difference between listening to customers tell you something and watching customers do something, right? Watch what they do, not what they say.
Yep.
And because as they say, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Obviously, listen to customers. Obviously, they're gonna be some key customers that have some great ideas, but you can run yourself around in circles, listening to the loudest voice in the room,
Yep.
when data in the aggregate will hopefully help, light the way in a much more sophisticated and fruitful way for your business. And
Yeah.
so I let the content kind of speak and look into the data, what's performing, is it the right audience that we want to be writing for? We could, one example is right, like you have clickbait, right?
Yes.
Could our traffic rise using much more clickbait tactics? Absolutely. But from my perspective and the way that we look at our business, that's not in my best interest. And so
Yep.
I say, no, I don't want traffic around XYZ topic because
Yes.
it doesn't serve our core business. And so, that's a hard thing to do, is to turn away what would normally be considered a key KPI. But we want to make sure that the content that we're producing is the content that our core audience actually likes, and not just, you
Yeah.
know, uh, people who stop by for a
Yeah,
quick.
exactly. Because many people who would like to get that viral effect, they might be doing something really polarizing, but that is not your business. You're not there to create scandals. On the contrary, you need to be as factual as can be, and timely instead. So, with that said, so no, this episode is absolutely not sponsored by Benzinga. We will come back to how can people get in touch with you later. So, before that, more just jump into you as a person, Brad. What do you do when you're not working too much?
So
I can
I
see
spent a lot
someone
of
on the
time.
sofa, for example. Yeah.
Yes, I have my puppy here who likes to keep me company for most of the workday, and so she needs a lot of attention. I also have young children who also require a lot of my
Yep.
attention, and so that's obviously first and foremost. When I'm taking care of our furry daughter, we go on walks and we listen to books, and I listen to
Yep.
business books and otherwise pretty much as often as I can. Because there's not a whole lot of time to read when I'm, as we talked
Yeah.
about earlier in the show, listening to my competition talk on talk on shows and disclose information. That's
Yep.
what I'm doing in the off hours, and then I try to listen to some business books and otherwise on walks and otherwise kind of trying to stay healthy. Uh,
Mm.
but otherwise, my interests aren't that varied or complex. Like any particular person in the
Yep.
media or financial space, golf is
Good.
something
Good.
that's interesting to me. But in terms of bettering myself, it's a lot of reading. Business books are always great.
Yeah.
Psychology books are always great. Just to kind of keep you focused and not letting your worst impulses get the best of you.
Yeah. So let's look into the future instead of like looking backwards. If we have this conversation 2 years from now, what do you think will be different?
So there's something that I think, and there's something that I hope, right?
Yes.
So what I hope will be different is that the society as a whole will have a correction when it comes to social media, that there'll be
Yep.
moderation, there will be better use cases, more productive use cases, uh, not advocating for, antitrust or for any companies to be penalized. That's not my point. I'm just that there are
Yep.
better controls and tools for parents, for children, that they're getting the most out of any one of these platforms. They're very powerful. And also on the influencer side, I don't know, we've gone really, really far in one direction. I hope that, and there was a Wall Street Journal article to this effect just about a month or two ago about some of the shakeout that's happening in some of these influencer pockets where people were spending all of this time
Yep.
producing content, and ultimately it didn't reach sufficient scale. And so I'm hopeful that those voices can remain, but maybe there is a more traditional house that can bring them under the umbrella, so
Yep.
that core standards and trust, to use your term, are better utilized. So that's what I hope will happen in two
Yep.
in 2 years, is that the society will self-moderate and we will come back from the extremes. I worry that AI will not allow that to happen when it
Yep.
makes it easier and easier for people to continue to create even more copy and content. We had an interesting speaker at one of our conferences last year who talked about the proof of identity. And I think I'm hopeful that that will become a bigger piece of our online journey,
Yep.
where humans can't have to be a part of certain functions to prove that this was not anything to do with AI.
Got
We're
it.
seeing we're well beyond the uncanny valley when it comes to content creation. It's scary, and even producing your versions of yourself. We had one of our social media heads decided he showed me something the other day where he spent about 2 minutes talking into this application, and then it spit out himself
Yeah.
without like indistinguishable immediately. And
Yeah.
that kind of stuff is extremely frightening to me. So I'm hoping there's going to be a moderation that happens
Yeah.
in 2 years. Whether it happens, I don't think that it will.
Yeah, I mean it's so cheap and easy now in theory to create any kind of content at all. So I'm parking it there. So for people who like to find you, and of course benzinga.com will be linked as well. So what is the best social media to find you personally and follow your work?
So I would say LinkedIn more
Yeah,
often than not. We're trying to talk about our thoughts and feelings. One thing I'm passionate about that I'll post upon every once in a while is the trust deficit in media. I just posted recently about how it's an ironic twist where media has been suffering at the hands of a narrative,
yeah,
but media itself is in the business of creating a narrative, right? So it's really ironic that there's an influence is ruining us, and media can't tell a story about itself. And I
yeah,
think that's one thing that I'm trying to push back on is saying that media should be telling the story about media and how all of the efforts that we take to regain trust, the checks and balances need to be out there. And I don't think people really understand how the news is made. And when I talk about it, I struggle when I first entered this industry. I started out in investing and trading. And
yeah.
when I moved into the media world, I didn't even really understand like what makes a news item and how does it start. And I think a lot of people still don't understand that.
Yeah, I'm usually at the sometimes because of strange career choices. I'm at the cold face of news, and we park it there without saying too much. Thank you ever so much, Brad, for joining us on this podcast. Any last three words to the audience? It can be five.
No, no, I really appreciate the time, Frederick. This was a great time spent here, and yeah, I'll continue to listen.
Thank you very much. See you next time. Bye bye.